I never thought the sharpest pain of my life would come from my own child's mouth, not from an accident, not from an ill. It came on an ordinary afternoon, in my own kitchen, when my daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Why don't you just die already?" The words cut through the air sharper than any knife for a moment. The kettle whistling on the stove seemed to drown everything else out. I stared at her, waiting for some kind of laugh, a grimace, something to show me it was just a horrible joke. But her face was cold, almost satisfied. I froze. My chest tightened. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "Excuse me?" I finally managed. My voice shook, thin as paper. "You heard me," she snapped, folding her arms. "You're always controlling me, always judging. I'm sick of it. Just die. Then I can finally live my life." Her eyes, the same green eyes she inherited from her father, were hard and unrecognizable. In that instant, she wasn't my little girl anymore. She wasn't the toddler who once clung to my sorry, afraid I'd leave her at school. She wasn't the teenager who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. She was a stranger, staring at me with venom. I felt something crack inside me. "Is that really what you want to say to me?" I whispered. My hands trembled against the counter. "To your mother," she scoffed. "Don't act like you're some saint. You've made my life miserable. You don't get it. You never will." It was as if all the years of resentment, all the unspoken anger she'd bottled up, came spilling out in that one moment, and the weapon she chose was me, my existence. I could barely stand. I leaned against the counter, as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. My throat ached, my eyes stung, but no tears came. Not yet. Shock is a cruel kind of anesthesia. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the kettle screaming in the background. Finally, I turned, shut it off, and placed my palms flat on the counter. "Get out," I said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "Leave," I said, louder this time. "Right now." She looked stunned, maybe even afraid, but pride wouldn't let her back down. She grabbed her bag, muttered something under her breath, something about me being dramatic, and stormed out. The door slammed, rattling the frame. And then, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but buries you in it. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling like the walls were collapsing in on me. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, unstoppable, like a dam had burst out. How did we get here? How did my daughter, the very person I gave my life to raise, the girl I sacrificed everything for, reach a point where she could wish me dead? I thought back, through the years of little fights, of slammed doors, of late-night arguments about money, responsibility, respect. The signs had been there, faint cracks in the glass. I'd ignored them, convinced myself it was just a phase. But now, standing in the wreckage of her words, I realized the glass had finally shattered. I don't know how long I stayed on the floor. Minutes, maybe hours. The clock ticked above me, mocking the normalcy of time when my world had just imploded. Finally, I pulled myself up. My reflection in the kitchen window startled me. I looked older, broken, smaller than I'd ever seen myself, and in that reflection, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead for her love. If my own daughter thought I was better off dead, then she didn't deserve the pieces of me I had left to give. I would cut her off, completely. The decision felt like swallowing, glass, painful, jagged, unnatural, but beneath the pain was a strange, cold clarity. For years, I had bent, I had yielded, I had tried to hold our fragile bond together. Now, I realized, the only way to survive was to let go. I washed my face, wiped away the tears, and sat down at the kitchen table. The house was so quiet I could hear the rain starting outside, tapping against the windows like 1,000 tiny reminders of the storm inside me. I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered, hesitated, then typed a message. "Until you can respect me, don't call, don't come, don't text. We are done." I pressed send. My chest tightened again, but this time from the weight of finality. The message delivered. The little checkmark stared back at me, and with that, I knew the silence in my house had just become permanent. They say explosions don't happen out of nowhere. There are always sparks, always cracks forming beneath the surface before the final blow. Looking back, my daughter's words that day weren't lightning striking out of a clear sky, they were the storm breaking after. Years of clouds I had tried to ignore. I remember when she was little, how soft her hand felt curled into mine. She would press her cheek against me and whisper, "Don't let go, Mama." And I never did. Through sickness, through sleepless nights, through poverty, I never let go. but somewhere along the way, she let go of me. It started small, a slammed door here, a sarcastic remark there. I thought it was normal, teenage rebellion, the kind that fades with time. I excused it with smiles and patience, reminding myself she was finding her independence. But independence is not the same as disrespect. By the time she was in college, the cracks had widened. Money was always the battlefield. I worked extra shifts, skipped meals, and tightened every corner of my budget just so she wouldn't feel the shame of being the girl who couldn't afford things. I thought I was protecting her dignity. What I didn't realize was that I was sacrificing mine. One night, years before the dye incident, she stormed into the living room. "Why can't you just trust me? Why do you always have to control everything?" she spat, her voice shaking the walls. I tried to stay calm. "Aisha, I'm not controlling you. I'm worried. You took out a loan without telling me. Do you know what kind of mess that can cause?" She rolled her eyes. "You don't understand anything about my life." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Everything she had, everything she wore, ate, or lived under, I had built with my bare hands. And yet, in her eyes, I was the obstacle. But I didn't laugh. I just sat there, swallowing my hurt like bitter medicine. That was the pattern. She struck. I absorbed. She pushed. I yielded. Even my friends noticed. My closest neighbor once told me quietly, "She talks to you like you're her enemy." I defended my daughter instantly, as mothers often do. "She's just stressed. She'll grow out of it." But deep down, I felt the sting of truth. The fight grew uglier as she got older. Respect disappeared from her vocabulary. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about control, freedom, and unspoken resentments I never fully understood. Every time she looked at me, I saw less of my child and more of someone who resented my very existence. And still, I held on, because that's what mothers are taught to do. We're told love means endless endurance, endless forgiveness. We're told to swallow our pain because children don't know better. But mine wasn't a child anymore. She was a grown woman, and her words carried the weight of intention. There was one evening I'll never forget. She had come home late, the smell of alcohol on her clothes. I confronted her gently, not with anger but with worry. "Are you all right, Aisha? Where were you?" Her response, a mocking laugh. "Why do you care? You're just jealous. I have a life." Jealous. That word burned. How could she believe that? Did she think I wanted her pain, her mistakes? No, I wanted her safety. I wanted her happiness. But she saw me as the enemy of both. Looking back now, I realize those moments were red flags, each one a warning that something inside her was breaking. Or maybe something between us had already broken, and I was too stubborn to see it. The house we shared became a battlefield. The kitchen table, once a place of laughter over morning tea, turned into a stage for accusations. The living room echoed not with television shows or family chatter, but with slammed doors and silence. Every mother-daughter bond carries invisible threads, memories, sacrifices, shared smiles, but ours had become tangled ropes, choking the life out of us both. And yet, despite all the cracks, despite all the storms, I never imagined she would cross the line she did. I never imagined the child I once rocked to sleep would one day look me in the eye and tell me to die. Maybe I should have seen it coming. Maybe I should have stopped excusing the disrespect long ago. But when you love someone that deeply, you don't see the cracks, you see the little girl you once carried, and you cling to her shadow. That's the cruelest part of all. I kept holding on to a shadow, while the real person standing in front of me was slipping further and further away. And on that rainy afternoon in the kitchen, the shadow vanished completely. If chapter 2 was about the cracks, then this was the moment the walls collapsed. Love didn't just fade, it twisted, soured, turned into something sharp enough to wound us both. It began over money, as it so often did. Aisha had been asking for more help. Rent, bills, shopping. Her expenses never seemed to end. I had already drained more savings than I should have. And when I hesitated that day, she exploded. "You're supposed to be my mother. Isn't it your job to take care of me?" she shouted, slamming her hand on the kitchen table. I swallowed hard. "Aisha, I have taken care of you your entire life, but you need to stand on your own now. I cannot keep emptying myself just to fill you." Her lips curled into a smirk, but her eyes burned. "So now you're the victim. You think I asked to be your daughter. Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, you wouldn't be struggling to keep up with me." That word, pathetic, hit like a slap. I pushed my chair back slowly. trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was hammering. I am not pathetic. I have worked every single day of my life for this family. I have sacrificed. Oh, please. She cut me off, rolling her eyes so hard it felt like she wanted to roll me out of existence. You act like you're some martyr. Newsflash, Mom. I didn't ask you to sacrifice anything. That was your choice. Her words were acid, dissolving years of late nights, double shifts, and empty stomachs. My sacrifices had never been invisible to me, but in that moment, I realized they were meaningless to her. I slammed my hand down this time. Don't you dare talk to me like that. Her body stiffened, but her voice grew colder. Or what? You'll kick me out. You'll cut me off. You'd never do it. You're too weak, pathetic, miserable. Each word was a stone hurled at me by the person I had once thought of as my greatest joy. For the first time, I didn't just feel anger, I felt fear. Not fear of her fists, but fear of her power. She had learned exactly where to aim her words, how to strike at the softest parts of me. The air between us was heavy, poisonous. I could see her chest rising and falling quickly, her fists clenched at her sides, and in her face, I saw something I had never allowed myself to admit before. Contempt. Not just anger. Contempt. I tried to steady my voice, but it cracked anyway. Why do you hate me so much, Aisha? She froze. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, with something vulnerable. But then she masked it, shoving her hair back defiantly. Because you're always in my way. Because you never let me breathe. Because you never trust me. The words poured out like bullets, and each one lodged deeper. I wanted to scream back that I had trusted her, that I had given her more than she ever deserved, that everything I did was for her. But I stopped myself. Something in her tone told me she wasn't speaking to me as her mother anymore. She was speaking to me as her enemy, and that realization broke me. The kitchen suddenly felt like a war zone, and I realized we were no longer fighting over bills or independence. We were fighting for control of the very bond between us. I backed away from the table, my voice trembling. I don't know who you are anymore. Her smirk returned, crueler this time. Then maybe you should stop pretending you're my mother. That was it. The line crossed. The bridge burned. My heart dropped into a pit of ice. The silence afterward was unbearable. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, my own ragged breath. She turned and walked out, her heels striking the floor like the drumbeat of war. When the door slammed, the sound echoed in my chest. I knew then that love, once a shelter, had turned into a battlefield. And in a war like this, someone had to surrender. Didn't yet know that the surrender would be mine. But the seed of that decision was planted in this moment, the moment I realized I could not keep fighting for a bond that was already ashes. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the street lamp outside crawling across my walls like silent intruders. My mind replayed the fight over and over, the way she sneered, the way she said I wasn't her mother anymore. The words circled me like vultures, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, sharp and merciless. Why don't you just die? I turned onto my side, clutching the pillow, but it offered no comfort. The house was too quiet, too empty. Once, this same silence had been a kind of peace. Now, it felt like punishment. My chest ached with questions. How did we get here? Where did I go wrong? Was it my fault for giving too much? For not setting boundaries sooner? For confusing sacrifice with love? I thought of the years I'd worked 2 jobs, the times I went without so she could have what her friends had, the nights I sat awake, waiting for her to come home, praying she was safe. Had it all been wasted? Was my love invisible to her? The rain began outside, tapping against the window like tiny fingers reminding me of the storm inside. I got up and walked to the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile. The kettle still sat on the stove from earlier, silent now, but its metal body gleamed in the dim light like a witness to our war. I poured myself a glass of water, but even that felt heavy in my hands. I stared at the empty chair across the table, remembering her sitting there as a little girl, swinging her legs, asking me to cut the crust off her bread. My throat tightened. Somewhere between the tears and the silence, clarity arrived, not like a sunrise, but like a cold blade pressed against the skin. If I kept letting her speak to me like this, if I kept bending, what would be left of me? I had always told myself that a mother's love meant endurance, meant forgiveness without end. But forgiveness without change is not love, it's surrender. And I had surrendered too much already. For the first time, I whispered the unthinkable words to myself. I have to cut her off. The thought scared me. It felt unnatural, cruel, impossible. Mothers aren't supposed to walk away. We're supposed to fight, to cling, to sacrifice until there's nothing left. But what happens when nothing is exactly what you have left? I sat at the table until dawn, watching the light creep slowly into the kitchen. The gray sky outside mirrored the heaviness inside me. When the clock struck 6, I picked up my phone. My fingers shook as I typed. Until you can respect me, don't call, don't come, don't text. We are done. I hovered over the screen, tears blurring the letters. My thumb trembled. Sending that message felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. But I pressed send. The little checkmark appeared, cold and final. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed the phone against my chest like it might soften the pain, but the silence afterward was deafening. I sat there for a long time, waiting for the flood of regret. It didn't come, not at first. Instead, what filled me was a strange, heavy calm, as if a storm had passed and left wreckage behind. By afternoon, the guilt began to creep in. My sister called, and I almost told her, but the words stuck in my throat. What would she say? That I was heartless, that I had abandoned my own daughter. I didn't tell her. Instead, I said I was tired, which was true. Tired in my bones, tired in my soul. That evening, when I finally crawled back into bed, I noticed something. My chest still hurt, but it was different now. It wasn't the sharp, suffocating pain of being stabbed by words. It was the dull ache of a wound that had just begun to close. I stared at the ceiling once more, but this time, I whispered to myself, I choose me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't relief. It was survival. And survival, I realized, was the only decision left. The first morning after cutting Aisha off felt like stepping into a different world. The silence was so thick it almost hummed. No sound of her footsteps, no slamming of cupboard doors, no muttered complaints drifting from her room, just the hollow stillness of my own breathing. I walked into the kitchen, and for a moment, instinct betrayed me. I reached for 2 cups instead of 1. I caught myself halfway and froze, staring at the extra porcelain mug in my hand. The memory of all those mornings, her groggy face at the table, the way she used to beg me for an extra spoonful of sugar in her tea-flooded back, cruel in their gentleness. I placed the mug back in the cabinet, quietly, as though even glass might shatter the silence. The house felt bigger somehow, its rooms stretching into caverns of memory. The walls carried echoes of a life that wasn't here anymore. When I passed by the living room, I saw the family photo still hanging crooked on the wall. It was taken years ago, me in the middle, her on my right, her father on my left before he left us. In that frozen moment, she was still smiling, her hand resting on my shoulder. I couldn't bear to look at it. I turned the frame face down on the shelf. Guilt seeped into the quiet, like a slow leak. Was I too harsh? Was I really strong? Or just cruel? Society doesn't prepare you for this kind of decision. Mothers are supposed to forgive endlessly, aren't we? We're supposed to fight for our children no matter how they wound us. That's what the neighbors would say. That's what my family would whisper. And part of me feared they were right. But then I remembered her eyes that night, the contempt, the smirk, the words, "You'd never do it. You're too weak." My chest tightened. Not with guilt this time, but with a flicker of defiance. For once, I had proved her wrong. Still, the silence tested me. It was like living in a museum of memories. Every corner of the house carried reminders. The dent in the wall where she once threw a tantrum at 16, the chipped mug she refused to let me throw away, the small perfume bottle she'd left on the bathroom counter, relics of her presence, mocking my decision to erase her. At night, the quiet was worse. I would lie in bed and hear the creak of the house settling, the wind brushing against the windows, the faint hum of the refrigerator. In that stillness, doubt grew teeth. What if something happened to her? What if she needed me and I wasn't there? I found myself rehearsing imaginary phone calls in my head. She would say, "Mom, I'm sorry," and I would say, "I forgive you, baby." But the phone never rang, and even if it did, I wasn't sure I would answer. One afternoon, my neighbor stopped by with some food. She asked casually, "Haven't seen Aisha around. Everything okay?" I forced a smile and nodded, but my throat burned with the lie. I couldn't bear to explain. How do you tell someone your daughter told you to die? How do you confess that you cut your only child out of your life? That night, I sat on the porch, watching the rain soak the garden. I noticed the flowers I had planted months ago, wilting from neglect. The soil was cracked, thirsty, abandoned. It hit me then. My home was a reflection of me, once full of life, now empty, drying out. But then another thought came, quiet and startling. Maybe emptiness wasn't just loss, maybe it was space. Space for me to breathe, space for me to rebuild. The silence that haunted me could also heal me, if I allowed it. I stood and walked back inside, and for the first time in weeks, I made tea just for myself. I sat at the table, alone, and sipped it slowly. The bitterness was sharp, but it was mine, entirely mine. And as I set the empty cup down, I whispered into the quiet, "This is the cost of survival." The house didn't answer, but for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like truth. At first, silence was her answer. For days, my phone stayed still, no calls, no messages. I thought maybe she'd accepted it, maybe she would give me space, but silence wasn't her style. When silence broke, it shattered violently. It began with whispers. A cousin called one evening, her voice tight. "I don't want to get involved, but Aisha's been telling people things. She says you've abandoned her, that you threw her out like garbage." My throat closed. She said that, yes, my cousin sighed. "She's telling everyone you're selfish, that you'd rather live alone than support your own daughter." The words sank into me like nails, my own flesh and blood painting me as a monster. And people believed her. They always believe the younger one, don't they? The daughter is innocent, the mother is cruel. Soon after, the phone started buzzing with questions from relatives, not out of concern, but judgment. "How could you cut her off? She's your only child. Mothers don't give up." Each word was a dagger, not because it was true, but because it echoed the guilt already gnawing inside me. Then came the social media posts. A neighbor's teenage son showed me one on his phone, a photo of Aisha with red eyes and a sad expression, captioned, "Some people call themselves mothers, but mothers don't abandon their children." My chest clenched. That wasn't just a post, that was a declaration of war. I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the comments I swore I wouldn't read. Strangers, people I didn't even know, called me heartless. Some said I must have been abusive. Others said I deserved to die alone. They didn't know me. They didn't know the years of sacrifice, the endless nights. They only knew her version. One evening, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she was, Aisha. Her face was defiant, but her eyes were sharp with something darker. "Are you enjoying yourself?" she snapped, pushing past me into the living room. I closed the door, my pulse racing. "What are you doing here? I told you not to come." She spun around, arms crossed. "You think you can just erase me? You think you can make me disappear because you're finally pretending to have a backbone?" Her words were knives, each one aiming for the softest places. I swallowed hard. "Aisha, I made my decision. I cannot let you treat me like this anymore." She laughed bitterly. "Decision? You call abandoning your child a decision? Do you know how pathetic you look? People already know. Everyone's talking about you." I stiffened. "You made them talk." She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe they're finally seeing who you really are." There it was, the retaliation. Not just against me, but against my name, my dignity. She wanted to drag me down, to make me look like the villain. Then she said the words that chilled me more than anything else. "If you don't start helping me again, I'll take legal action. Don't forget I know about the money you hid, the savings. Do you want me to make this public?" My knees nearly buckled. This wasn't just anger. This was blackmail. For a moment, the urge to scream back boiled inside me, to shout the truth about everything I had done for her. But something stopped me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was survival. I steadied my voice. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Tell the world. But you won't get another rupee from me. Not one." Her smirk faltered for a second. Just a second. Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I sank onto the couch, shaking. My heart was pounding like I had run a marathon. My own daughter had turned me into her enemy, her target, her scapegoat. The house fell silent again. But this silence was different, heavier, like the air after a bomb has gone off, thick with dust and the smell of smoke. I realized then that cutting her off wasn't the end of the war. It was only the beginning. After Aisha's threats, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a hollow shell, echoing with the ghosts of voices that weren't there anymore. The silence wasn't peaceful, now it was crushing. Holidays came first. The kind of days when the world expects warmth and laughter. I remember Eid that year. I decorated the house out of habit, hung the lights, set out the sweets, but every sparkle of the lights only reminded me of her absence. The chair at the table where she used to sit felt like a wound I couldn't bandage. Relatives gathered at my sister's house. I went, but I was a ghost among them. I saw daughters hugging their mothers, teasing them, stealing food from their plates. Each moment was like a blade. I forced a smile, but inside, my heart twisted tighter with every laugh I wasn't a part of. I left early, muttering something about being tired. The truth was, I couldn't stand the comparison anymore. Everyone else seemed to have a family. Mine had turned into a battlefield with no survivors. At home, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in the quiet. My eyes drifted to the framed photos I hadn't yet put away. One was from her graduation, her arms thrown around me, her smile wide, her eyes shining with pride. I touched the glass. "Where did that girl go?" I whispered, but the photo didn't answer. The loneliness deepened when her birthday came. Every instinct screamed at me to call her, to at least send a message. I picked up the phone more than once, my thumb hovering over her number. Memories flooded me. Her childhood birthdays, the balloons, the cakes I stayed up all night baking. But then I remembered the smirk on her face, the venom in her voice. "You're too weak." And I set the phone down. That night, I cried until my pillow was soaked. For the first time, I let the grief consume me completely. Not just grief for her words, but grief for the bond we'd lost. For the daughter I had once known, who seemed gone forever. The house itself felt like it was grieving with me. The ticking clock grew louder. The shadows stretched longer, the nights colder. Even the garden outside seemed to wither, its flowers drooping as if they too carried the weight of absence. One evening, the loneliness pressed so hard against my chest that I thought I couldn't breathe. I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, clutching my knees to my chest. For a moment, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if she was right? What if my life has no meaning anymore? The thought scared me, terrified me. I had never allowed despair that deep to take root. And yet here it was, whispering, coaxing. But just as quickly, another voice rose inside me, quieter, steadier. "No, you survived too much already. You didn't come this far to give up now." I wiped my tears and forced myself to stand. My legs trembled, but I stood anyway. I walked into the living room, picked up the photo of us, and turned it face down. Not because I hated her, but because I needed to stop torturing myself with what used to be. That night, I made a promise. I would not let loneliness define me. Still, the emptiness didn't vanish. It lingered in every corner of the house, testing me daily. But slowly, I began to realize something. Loneliness wasn't just a punishment. It was also a test of whether I could exist without her shadow. And though I didn't feel strong yet, I whispered to myself as I lay in bed, "I will pass this test." Somehow when someone cuts off a child, it never stays private for long. Families are ecosystems. When one root withers, every branch notices. I expected whispers. I didn't expect an entire orchard of judgment to bloom around me. It started at the shop. The chaiwala, the one who'd known us for years, suddenly asked, in that conspiratorial tone that feels like a verdict, "Is everything all right at home, madam?" I felt the weight of the gossip before the words finished. He didn't wait for an answer. He already knew which side the village would take. Relatives arrived next, not with concern so much as condemnation. My cousin's wife gave me that look people reserve for those who've failed at something simple, like a mother who can't control her child. "Are you sure you did the right thing?" she asked, voice soft but sharp. "Children, you can't cut them off. It's not done." They had a list of reasons why I was wrong, each one polished and repeated until it sounded like scripture. "You're too strict. You should have tried harder. Maybe you pushed her away." Even my own brother, the man who'd watched me scrounge for rent money, looked at me with pity that pried at my bones. The worst was the tone of pity that carried the belief I had failed at the only job that supposedly matters for a woman in our circle. Motherhood. People pretended to be neutral, but their eyes betrayed them. They assumed the easiest explanation, that a mother must have been cruel, unreasonable, or failed somehow. The narrative that spread was simple and sticky. My silence was read as guilt. At a family gathering a week later, someone leaned across the mahogany table and said, "You must let it go. Give her another chance." The phrase felt less like counsel and more like an accusation. Each "give her another chance" was a tiny hammer striking the same nail. "You are wrong." When I tried to explain about the contempt, about the insults, about the threats closed like doors, I could see the discomfort in their faces. Her version was cleaner, more sympathetic. Mine was messy and complicated. I found myself defending not just my decision but my character. That was exhausting. I had to rehearse facts in my head. The nights I worked, the money I had lent and never been repaid, the times I covered for mistakes so she wouldn't be humiliated. I wanted to say, "I am not a monster." But the words tasted hollow when spoken to people who had already decided at work. People were quieter around me. Co-workers who once shared jokes and lunches now kept conversations on neutral ground, whether traffic, the latest television program. Once, a colleague offered condolences in a voice that suggested I'd been the one to commit a moral crime. I smiled and accepted their tea, but inside I felt like an accused standing trial with no judge willing to listen. Religion and culture, too, folded themselves into the verdict. Elders muttered about the sanctity of family and the sin of severing ties. I listened because I respect our traditions, but I also felt the painful irony. The same culture that prizes respect for elders often ignores respect for the elder's dignity. When a daughter calls her mother worthless, we ask the mother to forgive. When a mother draws a boundary, we call her heartless. The barrage wore at me. It made me question my choice in those quiet, stupid hours when loneliness is a loud thing. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I had been rash. Perhaps I had misread things. The chorus of well-meaning critics begins small and grows until it's nearly impossible to hear your own thoughts. Yet sometimes, in the midst of that chorus, a different sound slid in, a single voice that steadied me. My neighbor Fatima, who'd baked me a tray of rice and lent an ear the first week, told me plainly, "You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to stop being hurt." Her words were not a sermon, they were permission. It felt like someone handing me a little light in a storm. Slowly, I learned to speak differently. Instead of shouting my version to a room that didn't want to listen, I kept a journal. I wrote down the facts, dates of arguments, money lent, threats received. I wrote the words my daughter had spoken, no matter how ugly. The pages became a witness when the world refused to be one. And when relatives pressed, I learned a shorter answer. I did what I had to do. It's not persuasive, but it's honest. It keeps the conversation from spiraling into pity or blame. And more importantly, it reminds me that the rightness of my choice doesn't live in other people's mouths. The social tide was still against me. But the edge had changed. Where once every meeting felt like a small execution, now meetings felt like passing through a storm. A storm can batter you, but it doesn't have to bury you. The chapter closes with a knock at my door one night. My hands trembled as I opened it. There stood my sister, rain in her hair, eyes tired. She didn't come with judgment or verdicts. She simply held out her hand and said, "I'm not here to take sides. I'm here to help you stand." Her presence felt like a bridge, not to my daughter, not yet, but a bridge back to myself. The world might have turned against me, but I was learning, slowly and painfully, how to stand when the rest of the world wanted me to fall. It happened on a Thursday evening. Ordinary, uneventful. I had just finished washing dishes when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with her name. For a moment, my breath stopped. I stared at it, frozen. It had been weeks since I pressed send on that final message. Don't call, don't come, don't text. And she hadn't until now. The message was short, just 3 words. "You left me." I sank into a chair, the phone trembling in my hand. My heart leapt with the ache of recognition. This was my daughter, my child, reaching out, but her words weren't soft or apologetic. They were a dagger dipped in sorrow. "You left me," as though I had abandoned her in a storm, when, in truth, she had been the one who pushed me out into the rain. For hours, I didn't respond. I read the words again and again, hoping to find something hidden between the lines, remorse, affection, anything. But all I saw was blame. The next day, another message came. "You could have helped." Anger flared inside me. Help. Hadn't I been helping all her life? Hadn't I emptied myself into her needs until there was barely anything left for me? Yet still, the old instinct tugged at me, the instinct to comfort, to soothe, to fix. I typed out a reply. "I did help, Aisha, more than you know." Then I deleted it. I typed another. "You hurt me more than anyone ever has." Deleted that. In the end, I said nothing. Silence was my only defense. But the silence didn't shield me from what came next. A week later, another message buzzed onto my screen. This time, it was different. "I need help. I sat at the table, staring at those words. My hands trembled. My first thought was fear. Was she sick? Was she in danger? A mother's instinct screamed to pick up the phone, to rush to her side. But then I remembered her smirk when she threatened me. You're too weak. I remembered the online posts, the rumors, the blackmail. Was this another trick? Another manipulation to pull me back into her orbit of demands? I couldn't tell. That was the cruelty of it. I no longer knew whether my daughter's words came from pain or strategy. The rest of that evening, I paced the kitchen floor. The kettle whistled on the stove, forgotten, until it screamed like a siren. I thought of the times she had run to me crying as a child, the way she used to cling to my arm, trusting me to make everything better. That memory twisted my insides, but I also thought of the woman she had become: hard, manipulative, careless with my love. That memory steeled me. I wrote one reply, "What kind of help?" But before I could send it, I deleted the words. Instead, I turned off my phone. That night, lying in bed, I whispered into the dark, if she truly needs me, she will find a way to show me it's real. Days passed, no follow-up, no calls, just silence again. And in that silence, something strange happened. I didn't collapse this time. I didn't cry into my pillow. Instead, I felt steadier. The flicker of change wasn't just in her messages, it was in me. For the first time, I wasn't controlled by her demands or her anger. I was controlled by choice. Still, the messages haunted me. You left me. You could have helped. I need help. Each phrase clung to the walls of my mind, replaying when I tried to rest. Were they pleas? Were they traps? I didn't know. But they proved one thing. Despite her cruelty, despite her anger, she still reached for me. And as much as I wanted to deny it, part of me reached back in silence. It happened in the least dramatic place imaginably. Small cafe tucked between a pharmacy and a tailor shop. I chose it deliberately. Neutral ground. Public enough that tempers couldn't spiral into shouting. Quiet enough that we'd be forced to hear each other. I arrived first. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around the chipped porcelain cup of tea. The steam curled upward like nervous smoke. Every second stretched. Part of me prayed she wouldn't come. Part of me prayed she would. Then the bell above the door jingled. And there she was, Aisha. She looked different, though not in a way I could name at first. Tired, maybe. Her eyes carried shadows I hadn't noticed before, but her jaw was still sharp with pride, her posture still armored in defiance. She spotted me and paused, just for a second, before walking over. We sat. The silence between us was heavier than all the weeks apart. Finally, I broke it. My voice was soft but steady. "Why did you want to meet?" She shrugged, eyes darting toward the window. "Because I had to." I waited. No comfort, no rescue, just silence until she continued. "You left me," she said again, this time in person, her voice trembling. "You just cut me off, like I was nothing." I swallowed. "You told me to die, Aisha. Do you understand what that did to me?" Her eyes flickered, but her mouth tightened. "I didn't mean it." "Then why did you smile?" My words cracked in the air. "Why did you look at me like you hated me?" She flinched. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her voice came out lower, unsteady. "Because I did, in that moment. I did." It felt like another stab, but this one was laced with honesty instead of venom. I leaned forward. "Why? What did I do to make you hate me so much?" Her hands twisted in her lap. She stared down at the scratched table. "Because you made me feel small, like I couldn't breathe, like no matter what I did, you'd never see me as enough. And I took it out on you. I said things I shouldn't have." The words hung there, raw and incomplete. I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell her about every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every drop of blood and sweat I poured into raising her. But I didn't. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "And do you regret it?" Her eyes met mine then, green on green, wet, trembling. For the first time in months, I saw not a stranger, but the little girl buried beneath the pride. "Yes," she whispered, "but I don't know how to fix it." The air shifted. My chest ached, but not from anger this time, from grief, from the weight of what we had both lost. I took a slow breath. You can't fix it with one apology. You can't erase everything with a few words. Respect has to be rebuilt. Trust has to be earned. She nodded, biting her lip. "I know." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the espresso machine filled the silence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "My therapist's card," she said, almost defensively. I started going. I'm trying to figure myself out. I stared at the card, the neat print of the counselor's name. A strange warmth spread in my chest. Maybe this wasn't just another manipulation. Maybe this was her flicker of change, the one I had prayed for in silence. But I didn't let myself soften completely. That's a start, I said, but it doesn't erase the past. She nodded again, and this time, her eyes dropped with genuine humility. I don't expect it to. I just don't want to lose you forever. My throat tightened. I wanted to reach across the table and hold her hand, but I kept mine wrapped around my cup, not out of cruelty, but caution. We weren't ready for touch yet. We'll see, I said quietly, but only if you're willing to change. I won't go back to the way things were. She nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. When we left the cafe, we didn't tea-hug, we didn't hold hands, but we walked side by side down the street, the silence between us no longer a punishment, but the fragile start of something new. The cafe meeting didn't fix us, it didn't erase the pain or make everything bright again, but it cracked open a door that had been bolted shut, and sometimes, the smallest crack is enough to let the light in. The next week, Aisha came to my house. I hadn't invited her, she asked, and after a long pause, I said yes. I cleaned the living room like a woman preparing for judgment, dusting, rearranging cushions, putting away old photographs. I didn't want the ghosts of better days to mock us while we sat in their shadows. When the doorbell rang, my hands trembled as I opened it. She stood there holding a bag of samosas, awkward as a stranger. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her, not because her face had changed, but because she looked unsure, almost humble. That was new. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded. She stepped inside, glancing around as if entering sacred ground. We sat at the table, the same table where we had shouted, accused, hurled words like knives. Now it felt like a courtroom and a confessional both. She placed the samosas in front of me. I thought we could eat together, like before. I managed a small smile. "Thank you." The silence stretched until finally she spoke. "I know I can't just pretend nothing happened. I said things, unforgivable things." Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. "I don't expect you to forget, but I want to try again." I folded my hands on the table. "If we're going to try again, it cannot be the way it was. I won't live like that anymore." Her eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean boundaries," I said firmly. "Respect. If you talk to me like you did before, if you threaten me, if you treat me like I'm worthless, I will walk away again, permanently. This isn't negotiable." She swallowed hard, but nodded. "Okay. And money," I continued. "I will not be your bank. If you need help, we'll discuss it, but I won't be manipulated. You must stand on your own." Her lips tightened, the old pride flickering back. For a moment, I thought she would argue, but then she exhaled and nodded again. "Okay, I get it." Something shifted inside me, then a small flame of dignity. For the first time, I wasn't begging for peace. I was setting the terms of it. To my surprise, she reached into her bag again and pulled out a small object, the chipped coffee mug she had left months ago, the one I had considered throwing away, but never could. She set it gently on the table. "I kept this. I thought maybe we could start with something small." Sharing tea again. Tears stung my eyes, not because the mug was valuable, but because it was her way of saying she wanted to rebuild, not from grand gestures, but from the ordinary rituals we had lost. We ate in silence at first. The samosas were warm, flaky, filling. Halfway through, I realized something startling. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't punishment. It was simply space. Space to breathe, to exist side by side without tension. Afterward, we talked not about the past, but about small things. Work, the neighbor's cat, a recipe she wanted to try. Nothing extraordinary. But each word felt like a brick laid carefully in a fragile new bridge. Before she left, she stood awkwardly at the door. "Thank you for letting me in," she said. I nodded, my throat thick. "Thank you for coming." We didn't hug. Not yet. But when the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt tentative, alive. That night, I sat in the garden, sipping tea from the chipped mug. The flowers that had wilted in my neglect were starting to bloom again after the recent rains. I realized then that boundaries weren't walls to keep her out, they were fences to protect the garden of myself. And maybe, just maybe, if we both respected those fences, something new could grow. I used to think a happy ending meant we'd return to what we were, mother and daughter. Laughter over tea, old photos back on the wall. But life doesn't rewind. It edits. It cuts what cannot stay. It lingers on what matters. And then, if you're brave, it writes a new scene. Weeks passed after Aisha brought the samosas and the chipped mug. We spoke in small doses, short messages, careful visits, no grand apologies, no sweeping declarations, just quiet, consistent steps. Trust, I learned, isn't a switch. It's a slow sunrise. At first you doubt it's there. Then the light touches the edges of things, and by the time you realize you can see again, the day has already begun. I kept my journal. Some entries were little victories. She said thank you today. We laughed at a silly TV ad. Others were reminders to myself. Do not explain away disrespect. Walk out if she escalates. Boundaries are love in a different language. The journal became a map, where I had lost myself, where I found my way back, where I refused to travel again. One afternoon, rain returned, soft, steady, familiar. I brewed tea and set 2 cups on the table, not out of habit, but by choice. When Aisha arrived, she noticed the second cup and looked at me with a question in her eyes. I nodded toward the chair. She sat. We didn't mention the old fights or the cruel words. We didn't tiptoe either. We just were present. The steam rose between us like prayer. I told my therapist, she said, fingers wrapped around the cup, that I used to confuse freedom with power. I wanted to feel powerful, so I pushed back at the person who held me the closest. It felt like victory. It was just emptiness. She paused, then added, I'm trying not to be that person anymore. I listened, not as a judge, not as a martyr, as myself. Trying, I said gently, is a seed. You water it with actions. She nodded. We drank in silence, and I realized the silence had changed yet again. It wasn't a guelph. It was a garden bed soil settling after a fresh rain. Later that night, alone, I stood before the turned-down photo on the shelf. My hand hovered, unsure. I didn't flip it back up. Not yet. The past doesn't need public display to be honored. It needs private honesty to be understood. Instead, I cleaned the glass and set the frame upright but facing the wall. I would decide when I was ready to look again. People still asked questions. The chorus that once condemned me softened into curious whispers. A few brave souls apologized for judging. Most simply changed the subject. I don't blame them. It is easier to gossip about a mother's boundaries than to justify a daughter's cruelty. But I understand now. Other people's comfort is not my compass. Dignity is in time. I returned to the garden that had withered. I trimmed dead stems, loosened soil, and planted new seeds. The work left dirt under my nails and a sweet ache in my back. As I watered, I thought of the seasons we had survived, our spring of closeness, our scorching summer of fights, our long winter of silence. The tender shoots that rose were not replacements for the old blooms. They were proof that life returns different and still beautiful. Aisha helped one weekend. She knelt beside me, pulled weeds without being asked, and didn't sigh or roll her eyes once. At one point she said, almost shy, I want to pay you back some of it, at least. The money. The pride in her voice wasn't armor this time. It was accountability. I felt something in me unclench. That would be good, I said, but pay yourself first. Build your own life. That's the real debt you owe. She smiled, small, sincere. The kind of smile that doesn't ask for applause. Do I trust her completely now? No. Trust isn't an inheritance. It's a paycheck you earn again and again. Do I love her? Yes. Even in our worst winter, love never left. It simply learned to stop hurting me. I think often about the line I crossed the day I cut her off. People still debate whether I was right. Let them. The truth is simple. I chose to live. I chose not to be the only door she could break. I chose a love that includes me, too. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the old kitchen scene. The kettle screaming, her smirk like a knife, the words, "Die, Mom." The memory no longer sets my bones on fire. It sits inside me like an old scar-sensitive, instructive mind. Scars don't ask for pity. They ask for wisdom. Tear is the wisdom I keep. Boundaries are not walls against love. They are fences around a garden you hope to share. Forgiveness is not a performance. It is a practice measured in changed behavior. Survival isn't selfish. It's the first responsibility of anyone who wants to love honestly. A week ago, I finally turned the photo around. I placed it back on the shelf, not because the past was redeemed, but because it was accepted. I pressed the glass with my fingertips and whispered, "We're not who we were. That's okay." This morning, sunlight slid through the curtains at the old hour. 7:18 a.m., catching the steam of my tea and painting the room with quiet gold. I lifted the chipped mug Aisha had returned and drank. The crack along its side gleamed like a thin crescent of light. A flaw, yes, but also a river for the tea to remember its warmth by. People think the story ends when mother and daughter embrace, or when one begs, or when judges stop whispering. It doesn't. The story ends when a woman chooses herself and still has love left over. If you are listening to this, if you are a mother pulling splinters from your heart, or a daughter blinking into the light of your own reflection, know this. The world will tell you love demands your destruction. It doesn't. Real love demands your presence, your dignity, your return to yourself. My daughter once told me to die. That day, I did the opposite. I learned to live.